Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Skip Rutherford, Dean of the Clinton School, and welcome. Could I please ask if you turn your cell phones and other electronic devices off? Several months ago, I was having a cup of coffee with Isaac Wright, who said that he was moving to Washington and he was going to be working with a gentleman by the name of David Brock. And I said, David Brock? And as it turns out in that conversation, I said to Isaac, I said, do you think David Brock would be interested in being a part of the Clinton School Speaker Series? Because in 1990s, he certainly played a major role in this state, to the dismay of some. But the fact that he had not been back to Arkansas since 1995 and has an incredible story to tell about what happened here and what he's doing now, that I thought it was significant that he make his first speech in Arkansas here at the Clinton School. And I want to thank Nikolai DePippa, who coordinates this and runs what I believe to be the best college speaker series in the country, and this just adds to that. To introduce our speaker today is Clinton School student Chris Morgan. Chris is from El Dorado, Arkansas. He's a graduate of the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. He is pursuing a concurrent degree in law at the UALR William H. Bowen School and is getting his master's in public service at the Clinton School. He's worked on a variety of public service initiatives here at the school, but he's currently working with Heifer International in their legal department about their worldwide affiliates. Please welcome Clinton School student Chris Morgan.
So I think we've all watched and witnessed pundits and commentators, authors and journalists on 24/7 cable news media. And one might assume, or usually assumes, as I have, that such commentators are often steadfast in their beliefs and somewhat stubborn and persistent to anything that may oppose or contradict those positions. When I learned of Mr. Brock and his story as a conservative, or rather his transition from a conservative-leaning to liberal-leaning journalist, I was somewhat surprised and intrigued. I was obviously quite excited to hear him speak because it's not a common occurrence. It's not something that you hear of often. Those of us from Arkansas, or anyone paying attention to national headlines in the early 1990s, most likely recall what was termed Troopergate, the alleged scandal involving President Clinton and Paula Jones. You might all know David Brock as the first to report the allegations made by Arkansas State Troopers in 1993. His story contained the first printed reference to Paula Jones. But that's not all David Brock is known for. David was born in Washington, D.C., and he grew up in New Jersey with a conservative Catholic family. He attended Catholic schools and ultimately attended the University of California at Berkeley, where he received his Bachelor's of Arts degree in history. While he was at the school, he worked for the Daily Californian, the school's newspaper. In 1986, he joined the staff of the weekly conservative news magazine Insight on the News, a sister publication of the Washington Times. In 1992, after a brief stint as a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Brock authored a critical story related to Anita Hill, Justice Clarence Thomas's accuser of sexual harassment. Just less than a year later, he authored The Real Anita Hill, a book expanding on previous facts that casted doubt on the truthfulness and veracity of Ms. Hill's sexual harassment claims. The book landed on the New York Times bestseller list and is considered the definitive rebuttal of Hill's charges against Thomas. Mr. Brock has since apologized to Ms. Hill. As many of you may remember, in 1994, the Troopergate story broke. In the January issue of the American Spectator, Brock published a story about President Clinton's time as governor of Arkansas and made the accusations that bred Troopergate. Among other things, the story contained the first printed reference to Paula Jones, and though Jones initially called Brock's account totally wrong, she initially sued President Clinton for sexual harassment. And these are the events that eventually led to the president's impeachment. After learning that the state troopers had been paid for their story, Mr. Brock publicly apologized to President Clinton, stating that the story was not writing in the interest of good government or serious journalism, but as a part of a, quote, anti-Clinton crusade. 3 years later, he published The Seduction of Hillary Rodham, a biography that surprised many conservatives as being too sympathetic to Hillary Clinton. He intended the book as a hit piece, but the project converted him instead to a Clinton supporter, and he soon publicly disavowed his earlier attacks on the pair. He says that the book was pivotal and contributed toward his transition from conservative-leaning to liberal-leaning author. In 1997 and 1998, he published 2 pieces in Esquire magazine in which he criticized his own reporting methods and eventually apologized to the Clintons for his contributions to Troopergate, calling it simply a part of the anti-Clinton crusade. In 2002, he published Blinded by the Right, in which he stated he had reached a turning point. He thoroughly examined charges against the Clintons and couldn't find any evidence of any wrongdoing. 2 years later, he released the book, The Republican Noise Machine. In it, he detailed an alleged interconnected, concerted effort to raise the profile of conservative opinions in the press through false accusations of liberal media bias. It was about the same time that he founded Media Matters for America, an internet-based progressive media group dedicated to comprehensively monitoring, analyzing, correcting conservative misinformation in the U.S. media. And he's been quoted as saying that Fox News is his top target, the organization's top target. In 2010, Brock formed the American Bridge, a political action committee focused on electing liberal Democrats. And most recently, early this year, he was named to the board of Priorities USA Action, another political action committee that has announced its support for a possible Hillary Clinton presidential run in 2016. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. David Brock.
Thanks, Chris, for that generous introduction. I think you probably did a better job of telling my story than I could, and I really appreciate it. You've obviously got a great future in public service, and if you find your way to Washington, let us know if we can help you out. Be happy to. I also want to thank Nikolai DePippa for running such a great program here at the school, a fantastic speaker series that I'm honored to be a part of. And Skip, our paths sort of crossed once upon a time, although we never met. I'm happy to be meeting you under these circumstances rather than in the bad old days. Thank you for the honor of being here and being part of the fantastic program you run, and also thanks to the Clinton School of Public Service for inviting me today. Most importantly, I want to thank all of you for turning out in the audience today. I hope this will be an informative and an enlightening conversation. It's about the right wing's 20-year obsession with the Clintons. How in their zeal to try to destroy an American president, conservatives upended many of our long-held cultural values, and they fundamentally reshaped how we all engage and experience politics and life in today's America. I'm also going to suggest how we might come together to change some of these dynamics so that we don't see history repeating itself again. And finally, I just want to ask your forbearance a bit. At the beginning of the speech, I tell a personal story. It's my story. It's a cautionary tale. But I hope for all of you here, and particularly those who plan a career in public service, you'll find something meaningful for yourself in that story. So it's great to be back in Little Rock. As was mentioned, it's been more than 15 years. I have to say, these are obviously very different circumstances than when I was here last. For starters, if you told me all those years ago that there would be a Clinton School of Public Service located on President Clinton Avenue, just down the street from the William Jefferson Clinton Presidential Library, I probably would have had a stroke. Back then, I was still in my 20s. I was staying just down the street here at the Capitol Hotel, drinking at the bar, and plotting a campaign of dirty tricks, all in the service of one goal. To make sure that Bill and Hillary Clinton would never make it to the White House. Seriously, that's the guy I was back then. I was part of what Hillary Clinton would later call the vast right-wing conspiracy. Now, when Mrs. Clinton made that remark about the political opposition back in the late 1990s, insiders scoffed. But she was right. The people I was working with then, they were after the Clintons. We were, and I was. Well, despite our best efforts, the American people didn't buy what we were selling, and they sent the Clintons to Washington. And in a democracy like ours, that really should have been the end of it. But this time, something was different. The conservative powers that be wouldn't accept the legitimacy of the victory by a young, dynamic, progressive couple who threatened the established political and social order. They were serious agents of change. So the conservatives defied 200 years of American history, and they set the stage for what amounted to an attempted coup. Now, the conservative magazine where I worked was called The American Spectator, and they started something called the Arkansas Project. That was a dirt-digging operation into the Clintons' past. It eventually encompassed a whole kitchen sink full of preposterous allegations, from financial fraud to drug running and even murder. And as the tall tales rolled in, the American Spectator disguised all that as investigative journalism, and they fooled some people into taking it all seriously. The Spectator's primary benefactor, billionaire Richard Mellon Scaife, heir to a banking fortune, understood something that others didn't. If you were going to hijack democracy and try to destroy a president, you needed a lot of money. So long before the advent of all these super PACs that have allowed big money to dominate politics today, he was willing to shell out millions of dollars to propagandize the nation and to wreck the Clintons. At the time, of course, all this was a little bit above my pay grade. My job was to get a good story, and I soon thought I had something that would please the boss. I was tipped that Arkansas state troopers who had served on then-Governor Clinton's security staff wanted to go public with stories scandalizing Bill and Hillary Clinton. And as a young reporter on the make, I jumped on the next plane and headed here to Little Rock. I learned more than I bargained for. Getting to know the troopers and their handlers exposed me for the first time to the reality of Clinton hating, which I could see had its origins here in Arkansas among racists who deeply resented Bill Clinton's early embrace of civil rights. The anti-Clinton animus deepened when Hillary Rodham, an accomplished professional woman, came on the scene. Well, as you can imagine, I quickly became suspicious of the troopers' motives in speaking out. To make matters worse, there was really no way to tell if what they were saying was true or not. I took them at their word, and I printed it all anyway. What I wrote became national news, and the scandal was dubbed Troopergate. One of the goals, turning the mainstream media against the Clintons, was beginning to work. The troopers took their stories straight to CNN and to the Los Angeles Times. And the press now had license to chase all sorts of news, even news that was not fit to print. You see, the conspiracy to upend the Clinton presidency could only work if the mainstream went along. The New York Times was already onto the story of Whitewater, an old land deal in which the Clintons lost money that set off a partisan special prosecutor investigation led by Ken Starr. In the end, it would prove nothing but the Clintons' innocence. Few seem to notice that under scrutiny, almost none of those troopers' stories turned out to be true. But I noticed. I later learned something else that I found particularly disturbing and that warrants some special emphasis, I think. A political partisan close to would-be House Speaker Newt Gingrich had paid those troopers to talk, a revelation that exposed the whole experience, really, as a setup and a sham and a fraud on the public. I'd become a conservative back in college because I was first attracted to the ideals of Ronald Reagan, and I wanted to make a positive impact with my journalistic advocacy. Now, legitimate ideological and intellectual opposition to liberalism was starting to give way to destroying people for partisan gain, with the ends justifying any means. And somehow, despite growing hesitation, I found myself leading the charge. After the Trooper story broke, a book publisher commissioned me to write a political hit job on Hillary Clinton to be published on the eve of the 1996 elections. The hope was that it would be the silver bullet that would finally stop the Clintons. So I spent 2 years researching and writing, retracing every step in Hillary Clinton's life. I did more than 100 interviews. I collected virtually every piece of paper with Mrs. Clinton's name on it going back 20 years. And what I found, I knew my audience did not want to hear. As I did my reporting, I came to see what Hillary Clinton's admirers saw in her, what I think we all see in her today, a steadfast commitment to public service and a deep desire to affirm the good and the virtuous in politics, all too rarely seen in her generation of politicians. So I had a choice: twist the facts and give the conservatives what they wanted, or stick to the facts and reclaim my integrity, which was really no choice at all. The right, meanwhile, doubled down in their war on the Clintons. They lost the enemy they needed to win elections when the Soviet Union collapsed, and they were struggling to compete with Clinton's positive agenda for the country. They had nothing to do but fall back on scandal politics as a means of regaining power. Setting the tone of conservative politics for years to come, Newt Gingrich was radicalizing the party and demonizing all those with whom he disagreed. He would later pursue the impeachment of a president based on the same behavior in which he had been engaging. Little did anyone, least of all me, know that the lies of Troopergate would lead to years of politicized litigation against the president, further enmeshing him in this ever-overreaching Ken Starr investigation. The Republican Congress saw an opportunity to open an impeachment inquiry. And that's the time that I decided to blow the whistle on what I knew about the wrongful scheme to thwart a twice-elected president and throw sand in the gears of progressive governance. I apologize for my role in it, and I opposed impeachment as an unconstitutional power grab. At its root, I realized Clinton hating had nothing to do with what the Clintons did or did not do. It had everything to do with fear of the kind of change they represented on the one hand, and on the other, a newly brutal form of partisan power politics. Those same reactionary forces are still at work today, abetted at times by the mainstream. The Arkansas Project, it turns out, was in some ways just a rough model of things to come. There used to be a respected intellectual conservative movement in the country that contributed to a healthy discourse. That movement now has been gutted by assorted billionaires and shock jocks who realized that they could use fear and sensationalism to undermine honest debate and buttress their own bottom lines. Every day, Rush Limbaugh and his legion of imitators tell their lies and spew their angry rhetoric. Arguments and allegations that really never should see the light of day, manufactured in a well-financed network of think tanks and advocacy organizations, poison the national debate. The money behind it all comes from the likes of the Koch brothers, Charles and David, two billionaires with a seemingly bottomless treasure chest, who've displaced Richard Mellon Scaife as financiers of the far right. The Koch brothers view their donations not as investments in their country, but as investments in special favors for their company. Already this year, a tidal wave of false Koch-funded advertising against the Affordable Care Act is misleading voters. The Kochs believe that conservative control of Congress, through which they will try to dismantle Obamacare and stage endless investigations, is a critical step to taking back the presidency in 2016, perhaps with their own man at the top of the ticket. In the meantime, the political, economic, and social progress that has made our country great, it seems ground to a halt, blocked at every turn by a recalcitrant, backward-looking conservative movement that has been co-opted by its right-wing fringe. I happen to believe Hillary Clinton represents the best chance of breaking this stalemate, and I think her opponents know it too. Perhaps that's why a bumper sticker, "Run, Hillary, Run," is popular with some on the right. They affix the sticker to the front fender. Or why the website of one anti-Hillary group features a game where the winner gets to slap her across the face. Or why Rush Limbaugh wannabe Pete Santilli says Hillary Clinton should be shot in the vagina. Like the conservatives who once savaged Bill Clinton personally, the conservatives of today have no program to offer the vast majority of Americans. So we see them running scared, once again, cultivating a culture of Clinton hatred, in Hillary's case, as you can see, with a heavy dose of misogyny. Of course, there is no Clinton candidacy or campaign, and there may never be one. Yet no fewer than 8 conservative organizations have set up shop to tarnish Hillary Clinton's record and her reputation before she even has a chance to make her own case, if that's what she chooses to do. The groups include the Special Operations OPSEC Education Fund, a group of former Special Forces and intelligence operatives with conservative political ties who are dedicated to turning the tragedy of the terrorist attack in Benghazi into the new Whitewater. Their false insinuation that former Secretary of State Clinton is complicit in the murder of 4 Americans strikes me as a faint echo of the most outlandish charges that were surfaced by the Arkansas Project 20 years ago. Now, even the most venerable news networks have been taken in. Last fall, the CBS broadcast 60 Minutes jumped on the Benghazi bandwagon. They aired a story suggesting that the Obama administration could have done more to save lives that night. Within days, the source on their story was exposed as a liar who made it all up out of whole cloth. Another conservative group, Citizens United, is planning to make a movie about Hillary Clinton for release in 2016. Back in the 90s, that group's leader was fired by a congressional committee after he doctored and leaked to the media a taped phone conversation to falsely implicate Hillary Clinton in scandal. A prior movie from that same group described Hillary Clinton as, quote, a congenital liar, not qualified, and the closest thing we have to a European socialist. That film features a woman suggesting the Clintons had her cat assassinated. Some of these efforts, of course, are business as well as political propositions. Anti-Clintonism has always been good for ratings, for click-throughs, for book sales, and for campaign cash. As internet provocateur Matt Drudge told New York Magazine in 2007, I need Hillary Clinton. You don't get it. That's my bank. Today's right-wing noise machine is far more sophisticated and far-reaching than in Matt Drudge's heyday. Back in 1995, a White House memo laid out what most people in the Clinton administration already knew, that there was a well-funded and organized group of right-wing extremists who figured out how to use the media, as the memo said, so that fantasy could become fact. Now, that memo was written before the launch of Rupert Murdoch's Orwellian Fox News channel and the broader misinformation revolution that we see online today. Fox News has changed the game for the right. In 2009, Fox's vice president for programming called Fox, quote, the voice of the opposition. That's what we're dealing with here, a major news outlet that has made defeating one political party its highest priority. Fox has accused Hillary Clinton of murder, compared her to a murderer, and suggested she commit suicide. Successor websites to Drudge, Breitbart.com, the Daily Caller, and the Washington Free Beacon, have as their sole goal slandering their political opponents. Their function in the media ecosystem is to launder dirt fed to them by Republican operatives and dress it up as real journalism, all in the expectation that the mainstream will be goaded into following along. We've seen this sort of sordid checkbook journalism before. In this environment, anyone in public life who gets in the conservative crosshairs, it seems, is vulnerable to having his or her reputation ruined. In an effort to slander Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel as anti-Israel during his confirmation battle, Breitbart.com accused him of belonging to the radical group Friends of Hamas. No such group exists. The Daily Caller accused Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey of cavorting with prostitutes who, it turned out, were paid to lie about him. Fox picked both stories up from the web, further spreading the slanders and forcing them into mainstream circulation. The slander sites are already key players in a broader right-wing strategy to create a negative environment that encourages Hillary Clinton not to run, or to soften up her image the same way a meat tenderizer softens a steak. The strategy is attempting to recreate the scandal-obsessed press corps of the Ken Starr era, only this time presenting recycled pseudo-scandals from 20 years ago as if they're somehow new or relevant. For the conservatives to succeed, they'll have to reactivate the old anti-Clinton mental constructs of our media elite. The market is big. Unprecedentedly, virtually every major news outlet has assigned a reporter to Hillary Clinton beat 2.5 years before Election Day and while she's still a private citizen. One study found that in a recent one-week period, cable news channels aired 80 segments on Hillary Clinton, despite the fact that she made no public appearances or statements. That's one segment every single hour, around the clock, for more than 3 days. Then, some in the media turn around and blame Mrs. Clinton for being overexposed, for creating an aura of inevitability around her candidacy, and they lament so-called Clinton fatigue. This, then, is the central dynamic in which events are now unfolding. On the one hand, a voracious news media hunting for any Clinton crumb, and on the other, well-funded anti-Clinton mudslinging operations that feed the beast. This is the troubling new order of American media and politics. It's also troubling that more than 20 years later, given her long and exemplary record of public service that's acknowledged on both sides of the aisle, the right's sexist caricatures of Hillary Clinton still have mainstream currency. Back in the day, the American Spectator cast Hillary Clinton as the Lady Macbeth of Little Rock. Now, a few weeks ago, one of the Spectator's progeny, the Washington Free Beacon, published a breathless account based on the notes of a friend of Mrs. Clinton's that are now archived at the University of Arkansas. Reporters over the years, including Carl Bernstein of Watergate fame, had gone through these archives and they found nothing newsworthy in them. But using a familiar sexist trope as a marketing tool, the Beacon story lit up the sky with a false claim that her own friend had described Mrs. Clinton as quote-unquote ruthless. Sadly, many of the most esteemed news organizations in the country felt obliged to file their own stories chasing the right-wing website. They ought to know better, because should she run, Hillary Clinton will be the most vetted candidate for that office in modern political history. Reince Priebus, the chairman of the Republican National Committee, has threatened Mrs. Clinton with the rough stuff and a truckload of opposition research, while conceding much of it is old, and I'm quoting here, some things might be new. Well, I doubt it. The poster boy for this retro strategy is Senator Rand Paul, who in a series of bizarre made-for-cable TV news outbursts has sought to bolster his own potential presidential candidacy by making a political issue now against Mrs. Clinton of a long-ago private indiscretion by President Clinton, even as Paul grossly mischaracterized it. Now, it's not surprising that Rand Paul is obsessed with something that happened a long time ago. His general mindset seems stuck in the past. Paul may pretend to stick up for women, but at a time when women in America are still fighting for basic rights, he leads a movement that wants to take women back to the 19th century. For starters, Paul has voted against the Violence Against Women Act, against the Paycheck Fairness Act. He wants to amend the Constitution to criminalize abortion, and he's considered limiting government funding for single mothers who have more children. Paul also defended fellow Republican Herman Cain against sexual harassment charges by telling the National Review that sexual harassment lawsuits damage workplace relations because they discourage men from telling jokes. But put this dismal record aside for a minute, because those who want to throw stones ought to be very careful about setting the rules of the game in such a way that a candidate is responsible for the behavior of those closest to them. Because by that measure, Rand Paul should answer for the cessationist rantings of a former top aide who is a cult worshiper of John Wilkes Booth. And Rand Paul also should answer for the anti-Semitic and racist material published by a newsletter his father, Ron Paul, oversaw, a newsletter that was the megaphone of a movement Rand Paul has now inherited. There's probably no better place than Little Rock for me to say, I know from personal experience that the best efforts of the right wing to market political smut did not defeat the Clintons. The truth won out in the end, and it will again. If the conservatives want to nominate Ken Starr for the 2016 presidential ticket, I can only quote a philosopher who once said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Now, I'm sure the vast majority of Americans don't want to go there again, and rightly so. They will find such a campaign more repugnant than persuasive, just as they rejected the empty scandal politics of the 1990s as a distraction from the real issues facing the country. So whether or not you feel as I do, even if you're not a Clinton supporter, even if you're a conservative, I have a novel idea. We're here today at the Clinton School of Public Service, and in the spirit of true public service, why don't we challenge our political parties to call off the political smutmongers? Agree to have a thoughtful debate about our conflicting philosophies of government and society. Give the American people the presidential campaign they deserve, one based on real issues and on the public record. Ask, is it relevant to someone's performance in public office before attacking? Acknowledge, as I do, that our democracy functions best if the truth isn't strangled by powerful interests. Know, as I've learned the hard way, that real power is comprised of a coalition of dedicated Americans of every ideological stripe, Americans who care about our future and won't take a lie for an answer. Thank you very much.
Well, your first speech back in Arkansas was a doozy. Thank you for being here. We have time for some questions. If you will raise your hands and then just wait for the microphone to get there. Yes, sir, right back here. Wait, microphone's coming at you.
I didn't have a chance to fact check this before I came here, so I'm kind of hesitant to even bring it up, but I thought I'd ask the question anyway. It seemed like I saw a reference a while back to Rupert Murdoch perhaps contributing to a Hillary Clinton campaign or helping to sponsor a fundraiser, and that drew some attention in the press. And I may be wrong about that, but I think I read that. And do you have any knowledge of that? And how could that work, or how could that be, I wonder?
So I think, and again, I'd want to fact check it too. I think there was some kind of a reception that was done during possibly her Senate re-election campaign, not in relation to supporting her, obviously, for president. And I think that's probably what you're referring to. And, you know, I mean, I think, you know, in terms of Fox News and all the Rupert Murdoch properties, I mean, he is known to, you know, play both sides when it's to his advantage. And the enterprise, at the end of the day, is a business. And so while it has a political agenda, I think the bottom line is always what Rupert Murdoch is focused on. And so I can't speculate what his motivation might be, but I think that's what you're referring to, yeah.
I would like to pick up on this very last issue that you talk about, a debate. How do you see that? What are the mechanics of that debate that can be an honest debate if there is a moderator, a very unbiased, perfect moderator? How do you see that happening?
Sure. Well, I think it's probably difficult in the media environment that we're all living in and consuming to probably get agreement. We probably couldn't even get agreement in the room about who would be the perfect, most unbiased anchor. And that's, you know, I mean, that's one of the things that at Media Matters has troubled us over the years, that the increasing hyper-partisan nature of the media is causing people to choose their own sets of facts and choose their own news and their own information, and then you have different universes of fact. And back, I mean, if we were here quite some time ago, I would say, you probably could get some agreement that there were the kind of anchors that everybody respected, and that instilled in people a sense that they were all operating with the same set of facts, and then they might disagree about how to interpret them. But that, Walter Cronkite's not coming back, and that was a long time ago. So the question is today how one would do that. And, what I'm suggesting at the end of the speech is nothing formal, but I do think that if people could stop and think for a minute about what the consequences are to what we saw in the 90s, the kind of politics of personal destruction that you still see today, could we be our better selves? And it would be a situation where it really has to be self-policing. No one's going to go in and really impose these kinds of limits. But as I was reflecting on my experiences of 20 years ago, I just thought that suggesting some boundaries might be appropriate. And I'd like to see it. I don't know exactly how it'll happen. Yeah.
Marcia, I have a question right back here. Yes.
Back to the first of your speech, what is it about the Clintons back in the early 90s that got the conservative movement to hate them so much? I mean, Bill Clinton's just a good old boy from Arkansas.
Right.
How is he so, what started all this?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I touched on it a little bit. It's a complex phenomenon, and I think there are a lot of different things that went on and that went into it. But the one I was trying to put my finger on was, I think it had less to do exactly with them than it did what conservatives and others thought they represented. And I think as far as the Republicans go, there was a lot of frustration that Bill Clinton beat them, frankly, and that was part of it. And it was unprecedented at the time, not maybe so much today, that when a campaign was over, it was over. And instead, they picked up the campaign essentially the day after election. And there were people that I mentioned in the speech who were actually talking about how to get Bill Clinton impeached in 1993 before any of these other things transpired. And so I think, as I mentioned, I think some of the progressive history of the Clintons here in Arkansas, that was part of the kind of toxic stew. I think when they came on the national scene, they threatened and scared people who were part of the more conservative established political order. You have to remember, you had 12 years of Republican presidents in power, and this was a new day. And so I think that was a big part of it. And then as time went on, I think President Clinton's skill as a politician took a lot of issues off the table for the Republicans, and so they became obsessed with this kind of scandal and with trying to get at them personally. And that started at a place like the American Spectator, but then it metastasized, and you had Newt Gingrich and others getting in on the act. And ultimately, that approach was rejected by the American people, but it took its toll.
Yes, ma'am, right here. The microphone's coming.
Thank you for being here. I'm Linda Tyler and can tell personally about the Koch brothers, but I won't do that. Question I want to ask you is, we have an informed electorate here in this room today. I believe the electorate outside of this room generally reacts to sound bites. And we continue to get the sound bites of he's Muslim, they're Muslim lovers, racism couched in other terms. How do we make sure we have that debate, but able to meet the electorate that's not quite so informed?
That's a very good question. So I do think that you've got a serious problem when, just to go back to my Fox reference, when polling and analysis has shown that people who watch the Fox News channel are actually less informed than people who consume no news. And so you've got a real problem. And So you have, low and no information voters out there, and they are getting taken advantage of by the media echo chamber that the right wing operates. I didn't get into the talk at all, the work we do at the organization I run, Media Matters. But if folks are interested and want to go to our website, MediaMatters.org, we are monitoring all of this political rhetoric on a virtually 24/7 basis and trying to correct it in real time and get the facts and get truth out to voters. Now, we can always expand our horizons, and we're always looking for folks to help us do that. I think that the first order of business is to get in there and correct what we can correct, and that's not always enough, but that is a first step. And I think that before we came along, we've been doing this for 10 years, the conservatives were operating with really total impunity. And that's not the case anymore. And so shining a light and spotlighting these problems and then trying to educate people as to what they are is one part of the answer, and that's the contribution. I tried to take some good out of a bad experience when I started Media Matters. And so that's been the approach that we've taken over the past 10 years to that issue.
I know there's a lot of interest, and I hope that each of you will come by and say hi to David. I want to thank and welcome Senator David Pryor, the founding dean of the Clinton School, who's here. From his balcony perch, Bruce Lindsay, the person who last night I said, I met David Brock for the first time, and Bruce Lindsay met the media for the first time. So here's my friend Bruce Lindsay there. And Mayor Mark Stodler, thank you, Mayor, for being here. We're glad to have you here. And David Brock, thank you for reintroducing yourself to Arkansas.
Thank you.
Thank you.